there any questions about that? Gary?
I was just a bit of an example. When I was in either grade 1 or 2 or 3 or something, I picked up a halfpenny on the floor of the schoolroom, which was like the carpenter's room.
Yeah.
And I had this halfpenny, so I went across to the shop with my mate and got a big lolly. Yeah. And my mate, actually, the shopkeeper gave him one as well. Yeah. So we went home, and I was quite proud of myself, but I must have lolly all over my face. When I got home, I got really, into trouble, smacked, and I was made go back the next day and take the halfpenny and another halfpenny back, and then I got smacked at school. So I got really punished for telling the truth. Yeah. And then now I think, well, the halfpenny, I know I should have left it there. But what's God's truth in that? Like, it's just there's nobody. It's probably the carpenter's money laying on the ground with a halfpenny. And but what's God's truth in that instance? How would I relate to that? Like, from an early age, I was punished for telling the truth.
Why don't you come up here and sit next to us? Talk about that. Might as well get stuck straight into it. Gary hates being in front of an audience as well, was the comment he just made. Yeah. So the key is for you to just relax and not project any of these things at Gary that he worries about. Yeah. Open up, my friend. So the issue is that, there would have been some things in the video that didn't hear that, but the issue is you basically got punished for doing something quite innocent.
Yeah, I thought it was, I just went and took the money, got a lolly, and everything was great until I got home.
Yep. Yep. And how does it make you feel? Like, how did it make you feel?
Like I was bad for doing that.
Yeah. Now, so what did it create in you emotionally? Basically created a feeling of you being like disgusting or bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you were almost made to feel like you'd lied, right? Or stolen.
Stolen, yeah.
So
that's what she said.
Your mum said that you basically stole it. You stole it.
Yeah, and I've got to take it back and give it to these teachers that were nuns that were fairly savage as well. Smack you across the back of the leg for a while.
So you got punished at home, punished at school,
yeah.
And ironically both by women as well.
Yeah, and before that, like in grade 1, I wanted to go to the toilet, but they wouldn't let me, so I wet my pants.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and then on the way home that day, there's the sewage in Brisbane used to go out on the road, so it's green, the gutters are all green, so I slid all the way home, so I wouldn't get into trouble for wetting my pants. But then I got into trouble for that as well.
You got in trouble for sliding all the way home.
Yeah. Because I was in whites, sports uniform, and they were all green. A bad issue with that as well.
And a lot of this was to do with women, wasn't it? Yeah. Do you mind explaining how it's affected you with women and your relationships now? Like, you're tempted to lie to women all the time now, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And why do you do it?
So I don't get into trouble, mate.
Yeah. Okay. So you can see how it's affected him emotionally now, all of these childhood experiences, right?
See, I don't want to say, well, this is why. I want to take responsibility for.
Yeah, but I want to say this is why, because that's the truth.
Yeah. But I don't want to say, well, I want to be more responsible for.
But the truth is that you can only be responsible for the emotions that are within you. But to be responsible for the emotions, we've actually got to say the truth about what actually occurred in each situation. You follow me? Mm. So the truth is that firstly you were accused of stealing, in this particular instance that you brought up. You were accused of stealing when you didn't steal. Mm. Then you were punished for stealing, right? Which wasn't a truth at all, was it? Obviously. So, and then not only were you done, that happened to you at home, but you now had to give back some money that you didn't even steal, and then you had to get punished at school as well, or these people punished you at school as well. That's all pretty bad, don't you think?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I always think it wasn't all that bad.
So what's the problem?
Yeah, I know.
What? No,
Minimising.
it's a minimising issue, right? So why do we minimise? Remember we talked about minimising yesterday?
Not feel the pain.
So we don't have to feel the pain of it, right? So that's why we do that emotionally, minimise the whole thing. The truth is that little Gary is very, very hurt about these events. So hurt now that every interaction with a woman that gets close always involves Gary protecting himself in even little tiny things, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't even tell the truth about where you've been today, even when it was innocent, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you?
Yeah, even Ange, I was supposed to be on a diet there a few years ago, so I had a chocolate ice cream or something, I forget, but it was on my shirt. So she said, "What's that on your shirt?" And I looked down and I thought, it's brown mastic, you know. Builder.
He's a builder.
So she goes, chocolate. So I was busted. So, as simple as that.
And how did that make you feel right at that instant? There was this terrible feeling of
Yeah, just terror.
terror.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gary's mother used to chase him around with a loaded shotgun,
Oh no.
sorry, 22, shooting at him. Right? So we're talking about a very...
Say minimise the gun thing just then. I was only a 22.
Yeah, that's right.
So can you see why Gary feels very afraid in his interactions with women? Naturally so. Right? Now there's a truth of God's truth never creates fear. Right? In fact, in one of the, I'll just have a look at it. It's on page 2, halfway down. Divine truth results in a fearless existence. Is what I've written there, right? Now, anything that creates fear in you, and I'm talking about the causal creations of fear here, not the effect creations. So I'm talking about the childhood creations of fear inside of you. Anything that creates a fear is based around an untruth. So if you look at what's happened in Gary's life, firstly, there was this interaction with, just innocently, like a child would, picking up money, saying, "Really, I found some money, my good law of attraction."
Was there a feeling in Gary when he saw the money that on the ground that would he pick it up?
Does it matter?
I don't know.
Is there a feeling in you at the time that you shouldn't have picked up the money?
I can't really remember that, but...
See, to him it wasn't an important part of the event.
I was never given any money to go to school anyway, so it was probably a real prize.
Yeah.
You know?
Like discovering something.
Yeah. And you know how when you're a child and you find something and, it's just like, you just want to... Now you want to do something with something, right?
And I don't even know whether it was my mother's rules or not that you shouldn't, steal money or pick up, even off them. I can't really remember that far back.
Linda?
Just about money. Carty picked up $5 in the gutter a few weeks ago, and she brought it home and she asked me if it was stealing because she found.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, nowadays, like just the other day, I was working at work in a big paddock, building a shed. There's a $10 note in the grass there, so I actually gave it back to the owner. And all the other boys are saying, "Keep it, idiot." Sort of.
There are issues of truth involved in those transactions, obviously. Obviously, if you know somebody probably missed what's going on, then do what you can to get it back to them. But this is not part of this issue emotionally, is it, for Gary? The issue is that there's a very deep core emotion in Gary now where in every interaction with a close relationship, he feels so tempted to lie because he's just so terrified of telling the truth, even when there's probably going to be no result in telling the truth. But he has this feeling now within him that there's just going to be this constant fear.
It must be that fear, like I was saying to you yesterday about I was punching the bag, with anger. Ange and I had an argument and I was punching the bag, and for about an hour or so, until I got that exhausted that I wanted to get to a causal emotion or whatever, but I couldn't. So I went downtown, and I was just looking in a kitchen shop, and this young fellow walked up the street, and I caught him in the corner of my eye. I actually just froze with fear or terror, and I couldn't move my arms or legs or anything. I was just down the main street, and so there's something like terror or fear or something in me that I've got to get to yet. So
Yeah. And can you see how much it's locked up Gary's life? Like, Gary can feel that very strongly, can't you?
yeah,
So if it was divine truth that your mother was presenting, all these nuns were presenting to you, it wouldn't have resulted in more fear with you. Also, truth doesn't punish. Do you understand that? So if you, in telling the truth, get punished, then the person doing that to you is in error and they're not understanding some truths about God's truth. Right?
You can follow on that there's painful consequences as a result of violating truth, though.
But they are automatic upon the soul. It's not about punishment. It's just about the consequences upon the soul that resonate with the universe. In fact, whenever you violate any law, there's just an automatic consequence on the soul, right? It's not because of someone trying to punish you, trying to make you feel bad about yourself. It's just an automatic consequence. So why would you, as a parent, or why would you, as a friend, or why would you, in any organisation, try to punish a person more than than the penalties that they've already received by violating law? Do you understand what I mean by that? Every time you have a desire to punish somebody for what they've done, you are actually yourself breaking God's law. You're actually usurping God, in fact. Can you see that? You're putting yourself above God because God doesn't even do punishment. And if you do it, then what you are doing is you're saying, I've got the right to punish or project punishment emotions at this adult. God doesn't do these things. So the key is every time I desire to do it, I'm out of harmony with God's truth. There's an emotion in me causing me to do that. Now, in this case, obviously it's very difficult for a child to actually say to itself, Mum was out of line and these nuns were out of line, when all of these terrible emotions were projected at you, causing a lot of physical pain even, and emotional pain inside of you that are now lived through your life. So one of the things that you are going to need to do to open it all up emotionally is start telling yourself the complete truth. One thing to remember is the truth is always emotional. Now, if you do not tell yourself the complete truth, if you minimise it, justify it, shift the blame to someone else, repress it, deny it, and do all of those other things we talked about yesterday, if you do any of those things, what you're actually doing is locking up your own experience of truth. So one of the things when you say, oh, but it was only, as soon as you say those words, oh, but it was only, and then mention what it is, it was only a 22. As soon as you say that, you are actually minimising the truth. When you minimise the truth, what is actually happening now is you're locking up the emotion. That's the automatic result of your minimisation of truth. Does everyone understand that? As soon as you minimise the truth, justify it, and shift the blame onto others, as soon as you do all of those other repressing things to the truth, what you're actually doing is actually repressing your emotions as well. That's what you're doing. Your emotions will only flow if you stay in truth.
because I was actually to a stage where I didn't care if she shot me that day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she went click, and there was like no bullet. And it was right at me back, you know. So, but I was that mad.
That you couldn't care less anymore.
Yeah, I punched the wall and walked away from it after I got down off the roof, and then I was that mad and angry that I couldn't care.
Now, understand that this event didn't happen when Gary was little.
I was like 21 or something.
Okay. So he was actually now an adult being chased around by his mother with a gun. Right? And could have been murdered, actually. Yep.
Yeah, and I didn't even care.
Now, let's say the truth about Gary's mum. Now, this is not a judgment of Gary's mum. This is just the truth about Gary's mum. What emotions must be in this lady to drive her to actually chase her son around with a gun? So, huge rage towards men in particular, right? Which would be suppressing what kind of emotion? Huge amount of grief towards men. Right, that must be also there. You find it? And what is she choosing to do? Not experience those emotions, but rather take them out on her son. And it creates, of course, a lot of things within you. Now, is what she did, from God's perspective, right? No. We need to say that. Is what she did toxic?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to say that. Just say the truth. Gary's mum was a toxic mother towards you. And to be honest, if Gary's mum was sitting in the audience, I'd be saying exactly the same thing to her. And if she couldn't accept that, then she just cannot accept the truth. And it's not a judgment of her, because she has all of these other emotions inside of her that created all these things, right? And Gary doesn't need to go down that track of even knowing what they are, or having any commiseration for those emotions. Because if he does that, what is he doing? He's justifying her actions, which then also detunes me from my emotions, which detunes me from the truth. You follow me? So the only thing we can do is just state the complete truth about what she is doing and has done right now. Now, many of you do not want to face the truth about what your parents have actually done to you or treated you as. Many of you also don't want to face what you have done as parents towards your own children. And in the end, if you want to feel all of your own emotions, you will need to face both of those things. Right? Because that's the truth. The truth can be accepted. Yeah? So Gary's question earlier was, where was God's truth in that? The answer is, God's truth wasn't anywhere in that. That was all your mum acting on her personal truth, your nuns acting on their personal truth, you being forced into conforming. And how did it feel for you in your heart? How did it feel for you at that moment? When you were blamed for stealing,
Well,
how did you feel then?
ashamed.
Ashamed. And how did you feel when you then you had to go and sort of confess to lying and you never did that? Confess to stealing and you never did that. So you had to basically lie to get out of it. How did you feel then?
Oh, yeah, for getting, I don't really know.
And how did you feel about getting hurt, punished because of it? Twice?
Yeah,
3 times?
got used to that.
You got used to it. So that is another justification. How did you feel? How does it feel?
I always think I always think that she was doing the right thing by us, by teaching us the right thing to do.
Can you see why Gary's not experiencing emotion?
Shutting it down, justifying it.
You're justifying her behaviour. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You think she meant well?
Well,
Do you
yeah,
think
she said
by
she
that
meant,
action?
She said she meant well.
Just because someone says something, it doesn't mean it's true, right? Mary, you?
I was just going to say that Gary was given some emotions, some feelings about himself from his mother and from the nuns. God has some different emotions about him, and that's God's truth in that situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So what Gary was feeling was all of these other people's personal truths, but God's truth wasn't anywhere to be found, really, from what happened to Gary, except that God wants Gary to understand the truth, and even then wanted him to understand the truth, and now wants you to understand the truth, that God doesn't feel the way your mother feels.
Yeah, I can understand that very well.
No, you don't.
Well, some of the weird things she done was.
Well, let's look what's being projected onto God. What do you feel God is going to do? When you experience all of your emotions, what do you feel God's going to do?
Not punish me for that, for a start.
No, that's what you think. It's not what you feel.
Well, yeah.
What do you feel?
Well,
What did your mother do?
punish me, yeah.
So what do you think God's going to do?
Yeah, punish me, yeah. I'll go to hell.
Right, so the truth of the emotion inside of Gary is that he now believes that God is the same as his mother. Right? And you do believe that. Even though you think, you've heard, we talked about all these truths about God, and you know God's not like that here.
Yeah.
But you feel God is that here.
Yeah, I think I'm one of the ones that, won't get there.
Yeah. You have a deep feeling.
Because I've lied so much over the years.
Yeah. Right. So Gary, because he's lied most of his life because of these childhood events.
I've even made up stories to make me a hero.
Yeah.
As a kid, I've made up stories or whatever. But then as I've told them over and over and into adulthood, I've forgotten what the real truth is.
Yeah.
I've blown up the stories or whatever.
So much that they're unrecognisable now, even to yourself.
And I don't even know what the truth is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how bad it got.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was all coming from the fear, wasn't it? All coming from this fear that...
Well,
terror.
yeah, terror. Because we used to be, as kids, we'd be told to clean the house up or whatever. So then my mother would go off to vote, but then she'd come back and appear at a bedroom door and say, "Your mother told you kids to clean the house up."
So she'd make out she's an apparition.
Yeah. And it used to scare the hell out of us. And then when she'd come home, we'd tell her that, and she'd say, "You're mad, you're silly," And then I'd be in the thunderbox down the backyard, playing with the candle on the wall, playing with the matches.
Yeah.
And she'd appear out of the dark and say, "Your mother told you not to play with matches." And then she'd disappear, and then I'd run up and tell her, and she'd say, "Oh, you're silly, you're mad. Don't be so silly, get to bed."
So what was her desire? To terrify him.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that would be, only that she would be trying to make us do the right thing.
No, but see, there's where we make the step from what did she actually do, what's the truth of what she actually did, into trying to justify what she did, as there must be some loving reason. And as soon as we go into that state of trying to justify what she did, then we actually are stepping away from the emotion of how we actually felt about what she did, and we can't experience the emotion. There's a really, really good book for many of you that you may wish to read. It's called Toxic Parents. I think it's Dr. Susan Forward is the author. It's written in the 1960s. It was a very old book she was so blunt, right? One thing I love about that book, and this is something probably that you need to consider reading as well.
I've even read that David Helton book.
Yeah.
And apart from the Xerox and everything that's taken the gap up there,
Pretty much all
I can't see much wrong with
what she did.
And it doesn't faze me.
There's another book that Gary just mentioned that is about, if you've experienced childhood abuse of any kind, you will probably want to read this book. It's a trilogy. It's called My Story by Dave Peltzer. Pelzer. And it's a story about his childhood abuse, and then as he was growing into a teenager, and then now how it's affected him as an adult. And it's a really, really good book to help you connect with childhood emotions. But Gary just mentioned that he didn't see much difference between Dave's life and his own.
Apart from the bad things that happened to him. But
Some of the bad things, yes.
some of the bad things that happened.
Yeah. So the issue here is, what does God want us to do? God wants us to face all of the truth about what's happened to us. You follow me?
Say that again.
God wants us to face all the truth about what's happened to us. Now, that means facing the truth of how people treated us really as it was. Not how we want it to be now, but how it really was. Right? How many of you were never hugged by your father? Never hugged. Can't even remember a time, except for maybe recently, maybe when he's grown up. Right? But never hugged as a child by your father. That's like more than half of the audience, right? How did that affect you? What's the truth about that?
We felt not good enough and unloved.
Yeah. All right. Now, God wants you to face that truth. To just face it and experience that emotionally. That's what God wants. So divine truth wants you to state the truth about everything. The truth about everything in your life. Everything that's happened to you, but everything also that you've done to others. Like, I went to my boys and sat them both down. They were 11 and 13. And I said to them, up to now, I've been a very terrible dad. Because I've projected on you emotions that now I can see in you. And now you're starting to live those emotions in your life. And I don't want to do that anymore. So I made a promise to them that I'm not going to do that with them anymore. Right, once I recognised that occurred. And I had to feel the emotions of that. So, I spent many weeks crying about the damage that I've done to my boys.
Can you give an example, AJ, with your children?
In terms of what some of the truth is?
Like the emotion that you projected onto them, just like that.
Okay, and I taught my boys, through my interaction with their mother, that a woman must always be acceded to. You must always do what the woman wants. And you must always try to protect and be responsible for her emotions. So if she's crying, you need to cheer her up, and you need to protect mummy from feeling bad. That's what I taught them. And guess what they're doing in their relationships? Mm-hmm. Protecting their women from feeling bad.
Is that because of your relationship with your mother?
That was because of, it had to do with core emotions for me, had to do with first century issues about my relationship with women and my mother and my feelings about how women were treated in the first century. So that was the core issue. But, that's how I display it until I healed that emotion. The problem is that I created that emotion in my sons. I taught them how to interact with women through my behaviour. Right? And it wasn't by words. I didn't sit my sons down to say, this is how you must treat a woman. But it was totally by what I did, how I felt. And all of that projection they absorbed.
But we're doing our best, aren't we? Like you did your best.
See, that was a justification. I've had my father yell at me because he felt I did my best. And I'm telling him no. Whether you think I did my best or not is immaterial. I need to state the truth from God's perspective. You follow me?
So we need to clean that up with our children.
We need to clean up everything. If you want to be at one with God, you're going to need to actually face the complete truth about everything that you've done and have had happen to you. Right? And not justify it. Now, imagine you're just sitting down with your mother for a moment, or your father. Just imagine you're sitting down together. And just imagine Gary sitting here and I'm his mother and he's saying to, why mum did you chase me around with a gun? And she says, well, you were an annoying little brat actually, right? And, I just couldn't control myself sometimes, you needed to buck up, Now, how would Gary feel with that interaction, do you think, if his mother said that to him? This is his mother's truth, by the way, at the moment.
Like he was responsible for everything.
She's just stomped on him big time, hasn't she, by saying that. So he's now he's asking a sincere question, and what she's saying, she is justifying her own behaviour and actually telling him that her behaviour was his fault. Right? And we do this with ourselves, with our parents' relationship all the time. You are justifying to yourself, a lot of the time, your parents' behaviour towards yourself. And if you're mothers or fathers now, you do that because you want to also justify to your own children your own behaviour towards them. Right? This is a continual cycle that occurs throughout your life if you don't own these emotions. Now, important for you to come to understand is that if you are wanting to do that, you will never be at one with God. If you want to hold on to your emotions and project blame at others, people, and not accept the truth, you will never become at one with God. So how many of you feel like saying, oh, but AJ, my mother and father, I love them now? How many of you feel, while you were a child, you didn't really understand them, now you get them totally? How many of you feel that? Right? So quite a few feel that. Right? Or that you want to justify their behaviour. How many of you want to do that?
Yeah,
justify their behaviour.
Yeah.
Why do you want to justify their behaviour? Because you do not want to feel the emotional truth of what their behaviour created in you. That's why you want to
say you really weren't very well loved.
Yeah, at some point you have to say, my mother did not love me, and feel that emotion. You're going to have to accept that truth at some point.
Well, my mother even told us that.
That
Often she said she never even wanted us kids. If she only married me father to get away from her mother. If she had her time again, she'd never have us kids.
So what's she really saying?
Said that often.
Yeah. And the emotion you don't want to feel is if my mother can't love me, then nobody can love me. I'm unlovable. That's the emotion that we often don't want to feel, like this emotion of I'm unlovable. Right? So, and quite often even with our own children, if we've done the same thing to them, we don't want to own up and say, the truth is that no matter what reasons I had for doing what I did, the truth is I created this damage in you. And you can say whatever you like and justify my behaviour, whatever you like even, but I can't justify that anymore. Because the instant you start justifying it, you will instantly get away from the emotion of it. Right? And you need to not justify these things anymore, even to yourself.
What's the role of lack of awareness in that? Like, I seriously don't think my father knew that his anger was affecting us.
It doesn't matter what you think your father knew or didn't know. The truth is his anger did affect you, and you just need to experience that. You follow me?
Yeah.
So when you go down, but my father didn't understand, what you're basically saying to yourself was that's a good reason for him to do what he did.
And then I'm jumping into his perspective and...
Straight away. And this is the thing about the Toxic Parent book, and I recommend it, it's quite a good read, is that she constantly talks about how we step into the role of the parent once we become an adult, justifying our parents' actions to ourselves, to our inner child, right? And therefore never experiencing the emotion. Right? You're just taking over the role they had. They were justifying their role to you, and now you're doing it to yourself. Right? And we need to stop all of that if we want to feel our emotion. So what would the divine truth do? What's the quality of divine truth? The divine truth wants you to say and feel absolutely what happened. Exactly as it happened. Right? Without any compromise. Without any compromise. In fact, if you look at one of the other things I've written, divine truth, right at the top, second page, divine truth does not and cannot compromise, even for the sake of truth. Right? How many of you would like to sit down and say to your parents, Mum, you did this? And how many of you know that they're just going to go off their rocker when you say it?
I've done that.
And she's gone off her rocker.
I've done that to her, but I can't say that to Dad because I don't want to hurt his feelings.
What did you do when both parents were already dead? You never had the chance to do that.
It's not about, in the end, like, you don't have to do this face-to-face with a person, although if the person is dead, as soon as you feel about them, they are there with you, generally. So let's say your father did some hurtful things. Let's say he abused you as a child, right? And he's now passed. The instant that you feel about the abuse that he did to you as a child, he will feel an emotional connection to you in the spirit world, and he'll feel drawn into facing the issue. You follow me? Because he'll feel your pain, and he will feel that there's somehow a link between your pain and his responsibility. So this occurs whether they're alive or dead, as we call it. Like there will be, in the end, this resolution of these issues. Right? The key is for you to say the truth, even out loud. Like if he's died, just say the truth. Dad, you abused me. You sexually molested me. I was 3 years old. I didn't deserve that. You did it all because of all these things. And like if you're angry with him, I'm angry with you now. And I realise that I'm angry with you because I don't want to feel my sadness. But at the moment, this is how it is. I'm angry with you and I need to get to my sadness. And you know what? The reason why I don't want to feel my sadness is because you should be feeling it. right? For me. I shouldn't have to feel it, you created it. You know, if these are the feelings that you have, just say them, right? Now, while what I'm saying isn't harmonious with divine truth, it is living in your personal truth if that's how you're feeling right at that moment. And you also need to go down the track of saying, all right, I know I'm really angry and I'm just denying these underlying emotions and I need to get to that place where I can feel those underlying emotions. But at the moment I've got to go through this childhood rage to get to them. And I'm really angry and pissed off with your dad for doing those things. Right?
Does that help him in the spirit world? Does that also...
Totally. Every time you speak the truth to another person, their heart changes. Whether you notice the change or not. Now, sometimes the change is negative. You follow me? They put up more of a resistance to truth, and they don't want to see you anymore. Like in my life, I've had my parents, one of my parents not speak to me for 7 years. My sister hasn't spoken to me, still doesn't speak to me, from 12 years ago. Right? Because of the issue of truth. But in the end, like, you can live a happy life because you're in the state, remember I said at the start, when you're speaking truth all the time, you're in a state of power and love. And you will feel that, and you'll feel that start happening. Every time you lie now, how do you feel?
Guilty.
Yeah. And yet the lies are all generated by this fear, this terror. So what's the causal emotion you need to access? What do you firstly need to feel, do you think?
About getting into trouble for lying.
Exactly. So it's about the terror of punishment for telling the truth. Yeah. Right. So now there's an association Gary has. If I tell the truth, I'm going to be punished. I must lie to avoid punishment. This is the association. The only way to undo that is to feel the emotion of the terror of telling the truth. How terrified you feel about telling the truth. Once you feel and experience that emotion and release it, you will no longer be afraid of telling the truth, and you'll be able to tell the truth, and ironically, at that point you'll also no longer feel guilty for lying, because you're not lying anymore. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So until Gary feels the terror associated with truth, he will continue to lie no matter how much he tries intellectually to start telling the truth. Until that emotion of the terror of the truth is released, you will continue to lie.
Yeah, I think I got to a stage where I just go from work to home and I don't even go for a coffee. And I've even given up coffee. Right. So that I don't have to lie about it.
Instead of just saying, no, I feel like a coffee, so I'm going to go to have a coffee, and then I'm going to go home and tell Ange or whatever, I just had a coffee, and so what?
Or ice cream.
Or ice cream, or a block of steak even. And you all know what I feel about eating meat. But if that's how he's feeling in his heart, he needs to go do that to be in the truth of that. Does that make sense? And then he will connect with the emotions. Why am I in this truth of this? What's the truth of this? Ange?
So how does he get to the point of feeling that terror?
Well, that is a choice in the end. That's the bit of responsibility. So what you've been doing up to now is you've been taking responsibility for your mother's emotion, minimising them, shifting the blame, blaming yourself instead of her and so forth. That's not taking responsibility. Right? That is actually taking responsibility for someone else's emotion, not your own. Taking responsibility for your own emotion is saying the truth about how I feel about that event and then experiencing that truth. I was absolutely terrified and I need to go into that terror and breathe through it and do maybe some body work and do some inner child work to connect with that terror of how you've made this relationship between truth and fear. This terror and fear, this terror and truth relationship is deeply inside of you.
Yeah. Well, I must have got right to that in the street the other night because I just...
Yeah. You froze.
I've been so scared. Yeah. And there was absolutely no need for me because it was just a kid walking past, so... But I just imagined that it was someone sneaking up on me again or something. I don't know what it was.
Yeah. So you're getting law of attraction events
Yeah.
that are telling you, it's the terror, mate, it's the terror, it's the terror. This is where you need to go. This is what's preventing you from growing at the moment. So now there's lots of tools we can use to access terror. There's body work, craniosacral work, some massage, there's all sorts of different things that we can do to actually access this terror and experience it. It's now just a matter of you making a choice to do that.
Yeah.
You know what the issue is. It's just a matter of accessing it and experiencing it now. And then it'll be God's truth. God's truth is that you actually are loved and cared for, and when you tell the truth, you should never be punished. God never punishes a person for living in truth. Ever. Yeah. Thank you.
Where does from just my perspective, a belief of the essence of who Gary is bad and wrong, where is the...
So where does the toxic shame come from, basically?
No. Like, yes, the belief from the toxic shame, the essence of him is bad and wrong. You're talking about the terror and feel that. Where does the feeling, the whole, completely I'm bad?
Once he accesses the terror and the relationship with truth, he will start living in truth.
Yeah.
Once he starts living in truth, the other emotions, which are the deeper core emotions of unworthiness, shame, guilt, a lot of other underlying emotions will start flowing up.
Right.
At the moment what's happening is the terror is locking down the truth, and the truth is locking down the emotion. The lack of truth is locking down the emotion.
Yeah.
So don't try to skip over all of that and say, so the bottom issue is actually unworthiness.
Yeah.
Or the bottom issue is that he's ashamed of himself, or that he's to blame. The problem with going to that point is, sure, we can go there intellectually, but you just skipped over a heap of emotions.
Yeah.
And this is why many of you are not able to access your emotion, because you're trying to skip to the end point first and feel that one, and you're not realising that there's these blocking emotions inside that first need to be felt. Terror, associations with truth that we've made, fear, and a lot of those kind of all blocking type of things are all need to be processed first. Yeah.
So is it like until we get through those blocks and those things being stressed, depending on what age that is, it's like the child is still directing our life?
Totally. The child is in a state of terror still. Yeah. You can force it if you want to actually, be in a... Like Gary could force himself to tell the truth every single moment. But it's going to be a huge intellectual effort, right? Because his desire from his heart is lie. Tell the truth, you're going to get in trouble. Lie. He's really going... His little inner child say, lie now. And if it's a woman, what's the inner child saying? Lie more. Right? So this is why his interactions with men are a lot more honest than with women. And the reason why is there's a lot of femininity injuries as well underneath all of that. But if we can't deal with the terror truth in relationship and feel that first, then are we ever going to stay in the truth about all of these other things? We're not even going to get to that place. So this is why you need to just experience the emotion of what you're in currently, right? The truth is that God wants you to stay in this state of truth. And I know we've got a bit off topic with this, but the important thing to understand is that when you're in a state of personal truth, you will in fact in the end access God's truth, right? Only if you're in a state of personal truth emotionally and not intellectually or trying to force yourself to go down a track that you don't actually feel inside.